Modular Cookbook. Drop in a poly grid. I'm going to start from the output of the instrument and work backwards. So here's our audio out. That'll send the audio out of the grid device. Got a VU meter so we know how much we're sending out. Drop in an attenuator. Bring down a mixer. Drop a label on it. Output. Give it all a consistent color. This attenuator is going to be the master volume. Good, I got an output mixer section. Working backwards from there, I'm going to need a VCA. And if you're coming to this from hardware, you're not going to find a VCA module. What you will find is a multiplication. There are a handful of ways to patch up a VCA in Bitwig. You can use an attenuator and then modulate it with one of these invisible cables. I'm going to use a multiplier. So in this module, value A and value B are multiplied together. I never thought of a VCA as being a multiplier, but let's patch it up and see how it makes sense. I'll drop in an oscillator, connect it to input A, connect the output to the mixer. Now we're going to need some way to open this, because right now it's taking signal A, which is a triangle wave, and multiplying it by 0. And this is a great example of what happens when you multiply by 0. Here's a value. I'll hook this up. This is going to be my VCA's offset. So now this value is controlling how open the VCA will be. Now this is an amplitude VCA, and normally the only thing that you'll find patched to an amplifier like this is the amplifier envelope. But I sometimes like to throw other shapes at my VCA, so let's put in another mixer. Naming everything. I found that that's really helpful in the grid, because once you start getting into bigger devices and you're looking at lists of parameters and lists of devices, it's really helpful when everything has an appropriate name. I'll duplicate this label, give the section a color. Looking good. Next up, let's drop in an envelope. I tend to like plucks, so let's use an AD. It's a two-stage that does its thing. All it needs is a trigger. There's no sustain, no hold phase. My next move is to hook up this envelope to the VCA. And since the pre-chord trigger button is lit, it should respond to my MIDI keyboard. Good. Next up, let's find a filter. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different types of filters. Let's use them all. I want to learn these, and this is a great opportunity to do that. Figure out how they're different, how they're the same, and what they are best suited for. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I feel like the comb filter doesn't really belong in there, but since I don't know what filter I want to use for this yet, maybe a combination of filters, I just brought all the available filters out, and we will connect a switch to go through them, see what they excel at, what their weak points are. So I'm going to need a merge. Now, a merge in Bitwig is basically a switch. You can choose up to 8 inputs. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to set this up for 6 inputs and connect a filter to each one. Go to the settings for the merge device, and under interpolation, it'll be either nearest or linear. Now, linear is an interpolated sweep. It will crossfade between the sources as it goes through the line. Nearest will make it snap to a source. And that is what I want. I'll take a value, connect it to the CV input, and as I change the value, you can see that a different input is being selected to be sent to the output. And that output is going to be sent to the VCA's input. So it'll disconnect the triangle wave. Give this control a name. Now here's the thing that I'm not certain about. If we were in the analog domain and I were doing this trick, I would just mult the output of the oscillator to all the filters and then choose one of the filter's outputs with this switch. But I know that sometimes in software, I don't know how it's implemented in the grid, but I know that sometimes devices are turned off or not using CPU resources when they're not being used. I don't know if that's the case with these filters, but just in case it is, I'm going to set up an input switch as well, which is called a split. I'm also going to set that up with 1 input, 6 outputs, and these outputs are going to drive the filters. If you know how this stuff works, leave a note in the comments. Let me know. Help us all out, because this could be a waste of time, but it also feels kind of elegant, so I'll use the same selector control, and my oscillator is going to go to this input. What I want to do now is mirror the controls on all these filters. So the bipolar controls, like the input drive, I'll set in the middle, and the frequencies I'll all set to their minimum, which looks like it's 19.4 Hertz. We'll set the resonances all to 0. It's interesting, they have these little arrows by the resonances. I should read the manual. I don't know what those represent. Is it maybe the point that they self-oscillate? Although that wouldn't seem reasonable. I wouldn't expect that to happen. I don't know. Let's read the manual. So let's put in a couple macros above this so I can control all these filters with a common set of controls. And grab a value, pair it up to a modulator. Now, since all these filters do have modulation inputs, these orange ones, I could run patch cables, but let's do this wireless. This is a structure I use a lot. It's just a value, either unipolar or bipolar, connected to a modulator. I'm going to call this one cutoff. Make another one, call it resonance. And now the cutoff, I'm going to apply to all 6 filters. And the resonance, do the same thing. The comb has a feedback. So now when I move this cutoff macro, you see that all 6 filters are adjusted by the same amount. Same with the resonance. Next, I'm going to gussy up this section a little bit so that it looks like its own thing. This is how I like to do it. Whenever I'm working with a really open-ended system like this, I find it's important to have standards, things that I always do the same way. Even if they don't always make the most sense, I think an imperfect system is generally preferable to no system at all, especially if we're willing to let it grow. So this is how I do it. I just put a label over the top. It's wide enough to cover everything that's below it. I know that everything below that is my filter section. And any global controls for that section I'll keep as these macros here up top, which are then easily mapped to the device panel macros when I start setting up my physical interface. Let's see what these filters sound like. Put labels on the switches so it's a little easier to see which one we're listening to at any given time. Great. Now if I'm auditioning filters, I'm going to want to do it with 2 hands. So I'm going to start getting my macros set up here on the device. I'm going to group my parameters in clusters of 8 just because 8 is a number that seems to come up a lot in music production, and many MIDI controllers have some multiple of 8 controls. So here are my macros. And I'll start out here, call this one cutoff, this one Q. Now let's keep it consistent, I'll call it resonance. Cutoff maps to my global grid macro, same thing with the resonance. And just temporarily I'm going to assign the filter select to a macro as well. Because I'm probably not going to keep all these filters. I just want to choose the one that I like. I'll start with the ladder and start working down the list. Sound key. Why am I using a triangle? There's nothing for the filter to chew on. That's better. Okay, so the sound key, it has a nice full sound. You don't lose a lot of low end when the resonance is high, but the resonance is really mellow. Even at really high values. I like that. I like this filter. Let's try the Moog one. I like that. I like the Moog one. Ah, this is a state variable filter. Interesting. There's like a complicated resonance on that. Sounds very digital. I don't know if it's supposed to, but I like it. XP. Ah, resonance isn't mapped. Okay, it looks like that's maybe a couple of filters in series. I like that. Although, I don't see any reason why we couldn't put a couple filters in series. Well, who knows? We'll play around with it. Great, well, it's all dialed in. I don't have to make a decision right now. I will just leave it on the Moog filter and we'll see if that decision continues to work for me. All right, my next move is I want this filter to snap. So I want to point an envelope at it. For now, I'll just use the envelope we already have. It'll do until it doesn't. The main reason I like to use macros like this up at the top of a section is that this gap here allows for anything to happen to the CV. It can be routed elsewhere, it can be frozen, it can be merged with other things. So that's what I'm going to do right now because I want to send this envelope to all of these filters and I don't want to patch it all up individually. So I need a mixer. I'll connect the amp envelope up there and label the mixer input. So now my amp envelope is also modulating the filter's cutoff. The amount of envelope going to the filter is an important control, so I'm going to want to give that its own macro. Duplicate one of these extras, call it envelope amount, and I'll map that to this mixer input. I'll just modulate it up to 1, so I'm not adding any extra gain. Might want to change that. And you know, I want to map that to a hardware control sooner than later, so I'll free up this one that I used for filter selection. Now that I know what I want, it's on the Moog. I'll manually move that control back to where it was. Good. This control will now be envelope amount. And I'll map it to this macro. Let's see what we got. So that's starting to sound a little bit like a synthesizer. Take a break, get up, stretch. We're going to follow up and build a sequencer for this in a later video, but I'm just going to get this moving with some notes and an arpeggiator. That'll work. You know, I realized I don't actually like this filter as much as I thought I did. Let's try a different one. All right, coming back to the low pass ladder. 18 dB. That's appropriate. That's, I believe, the same slope as the 303, which is kind of what we're doing. I want to automate some of this control over the filters for right now just because I only have so many hands. So I'm going to throw in a sequencer. You know what? For temporary stuff, I'll just use a macro sequencer. So this is going to be running at a rate of 1/16th note. Because the next thing I want to do is spice up this oscillator a little bit. Alright, so if output's orange, VCA's green, filter's yellow, oscillator has to be... yeah, blue will work. For my oscillator, I want something that's more interesting than the standard waveform. I'd like to FM it up a little bit, but I want it to have a really wide sweet spot. I want almost everything it does to sound good. And when we come back to this later, in a future video, we're going to turn this into a nice Platts-inspired macro oscillator with multiple modes, but I want to build it with the things that I want, and hopefully the design principles that I go over will help you discover what it is that you want in your instrument. For now, I'm just going to throw another oscillator on here to shake things up. How about another triangle? I'll label these. You have our modulator and our carrier. We're not actually going to hear the output of the modulation oscillator, it's just going to influence the pitch and timbre of the carrier. So like everything in Bitwig, there are a few ways to do this. I think what I want to do is use a modulator. The fold is neat. I like that. I'm not often a fan of folding effects, especially when they're swept, but I like this one. Let's point this modulator at skew. I want to experiment here, so I'm going to put in a few separate modulators going to different parameters so that I can have eyes on the problem. This will go to fold. How about that? Well, These are operating at the exact same frequency, and they're probably even locked together in phase, probably. Nice. Okay, I think I like that octave down. Alright, so that's a little FM oscillator. I'm not sure if it's technically FM because it's not modulating the frequency of the carrier oscillator, but it is modulating the timbre. I just found two controls that could spice up the oscillator in a musically interesting way. I could hear myself saying, that would be a tasty thing to add in the context of a mix. So this is simple. It's a little bit more interesting than a basic oscillator, and for right now, I think that's all I need. Now this is sounding a little tubby, as synthesizers often do, so I'm going to high pass it. This takes away a little bit of the flub on the bottom end of the sound. Leave a little more room for my kick drum, assuming there's a kick drum. And since these macros, the skew and the fold modulation are things that I think I want to keep in this oscillator, I'll move them up to the position of honor here at the top, where the most favored controls go. And while I'm at it, I'll add some hardware controls. I'll start a second bank of 8 for my oscillator, leave a gap here. I'll drop a button here. I wish there was a device that just let you put text, labels, so I use a button. Lets me know that this is my oscillator section. So you've got skew mod and fold mod. Map them to the hardware. Let's show this envelope a little love. It needs its own section. Envelopes. Here we go. Let's envelope it. Envelopes are something I have opinions about because it's the main articulation for the voice. So the shape of it matters. The control ranges matter. The amount of things that are allowed to influence these things matters to the quality of the sound. So I'm going to set up some macros. So we have 4 macros because there are 4 things that I care about controlling on this envelope. I want to control the attack, the decay, and the curve of each. So I'll drop these all down to their minimum values and assign them to macros. The curves are hidden away in this side panel for the envelopes, if you're looking for them. Next, I will set up some physical controls to get hands on these envelopes. This envelope. Let's see what we got. Oh, you know, I forgot. I don't really like the analog mode on this envelope. It's not as snappy. I prefer the relative mode. So now there's a lot more control over the shape of the curve. We've got not just the decay time, but the shape of that decay. You can go from plucky to pugnacious. I don't know what I want to do with that attack curve. Let's leave it alone. I don't need the control for anything else right now, so you can stay. Okay, right there. Hear that little click on the attack? I don't like that. So I wanted to find the ranges of these envelopes to be musically useful ranges. I only have so much control. I have 128 steps on a MIDI parameter. So I want all of that range to be useful, and I want to be able to play the instrument in a way that feels like it ought to be played. So these ranges are a little off right now. Let's fix them. I want to find the shortest attack and decay times that I think are going to be useful for the synthesizer. So I'll turn my hardware controls down, play with the envelope itself. So it's pretty short. Even if I bring it down to like 6 milliseconds, which is super short, it's enough that even at the lowest end of the knobs range, we're not going to get clicking. Now let's deal with the other end of the range. How long can I make the attack with the sweep of the knob? It's very long. Longer than we need. Live with that. I like that. I don't need to modify the range of the decay at all because I like being able to open the envelope all the way up. It gets those nice long plucks. I'm realizing that I forgot a really important filter parameter, the drive. I'm going to bring a value in. Since these drives are bipolar controls with 0 being at the center, we're going to want to make our controller bipolar as well. Drop in a modulator, and I'm going to assign this to all the filters. I don't know how much I want to modulate this, probably not a ton. So I'm going to move all these. It's kind of hard to land at the value you want when you're dragging this around. So what I like to do is just assign a little modulation to all of them. Then you see all the destinations here because I have this modulator selected. There, you can click on it and just type 1. I did assign this to be bipolar, but as I'm listening, I think I'm probably only going to want to boost the gain on this. I don't think there's really a use case where I'm going to want to lower the input gain to the filter. So maybe I will just make the macro control down here be unipolar. Okay, I want to drive control, so I'm going to sacrifice this attack curve control. I'm going to unmap it from attack curve and map it instead to drive. Yeah, adding a little extra drive can be a great way to compensate for the way that the low end gets sucked out of it as the resonance increases. Here it is with no drive. It's weak. Good. I like having that drive control there. It's possible that I don't need it mapped to a physical control though. Maybe I'll just find a level that I like and it'll sit there. But drive is pretty dynamic. It might be something that I want to modulate. It might be something that I want to get hands on. So for the time being, it stays. Next, I want to get in here and start breaking some of the default connections that Bitwig makes because I want to make them in different ways. So by default, there are these sort of invisible chords. I think they're called pre-chords. Yeah, pre-chords that are connected to all the oscillators. If the keyboard icon is lit here, it means that it's receiving note input from whatever's feeding it notes. And if you deselect it, it means that it's not. This can actually have some interesting results if we turn off key tracking on the modulator. So obviously with the key tracking on, it's more coherent because it tracks with the carrier. But you can get a little more dirt, a little more inharmonic stuff going on if you turn off key tracking. I'm going to leave it on for now. But what I want to turn off is key tracking on the filters. And let's control the oscillators in a different way. Instead of using the pre-chord, I want to use a note in device. That gives us more access to the MIDI data. So I'll connect the pitch CV to both inputs. You hear that nothing changes. So you have to do, turn off the keyboard here and turn up the input to 120 semitones. That does the same thing. But now it's not listening directly to the notes coming in, it's listening to the notes coming in, and there's cable, which means that I can plug anything I want into that cable and make changes to it. Like a transposer on one or both oscillators. And actually, since this is a bass instrument, let's transpose both these down an octave. That's starting to sound pretty nice. Yeah, that's starting to sound like an instrument. Well, let's keep going. Never built a playground before, but I'm ready to put in some slides. So I have a lag, an average, and a low pass device. And all three of these things have something in common, which is that they slow the rate of change of a signal going through them. Let's see how they work on CV. We'll just start with one. The lag. Play sequence, turn it up. So it's a glide, it's a portamento. It makes notes glide from one to the next instead of snap immediately there. Let's see how the averager compares in the way that it sounds. I think I like the way that the averager sounds better for this patch. Let's see what the low pass does. Okay, so low pass doesn't do too much. When we bring it all the way down to 19 Hertz and crank up the shoulder as high as it'll go, it puts a little squiggle on the pitch CV, but not much. I think I'm going to stick with this averager device. And I'm noticing that let's see, what about 10 o'clock here, and it's 2.6 milliseconds. So from, the bottom of the knobs range, what is that? 7 o'clock up to about 10 o'clock. That's 2 milliseconds we're dealing with. So I don't think I need all that. I'm going to find the highest value that doesn't sound like it's doing anything. I think 4 milliseconds is good. Now, I want this to slide on some steps, but not others. So I'll throw in another quick and dirty sequencer here to just mock it up. Copy this one. Okay, I've noticed that when you duplicate devices in Bitwig with the control drag, if anything is modulating the device that you're copying, those modulations will remain intact. But if the device that you're copying is modulating something else, those will be broken. Kind of makes sense. It would be nice if there was a key combo, like maybe if you did Control Alt or something, it would break all of them, or allow some way to choose that behavior. Maybe it'll come. Now that it's all hooked up in context, I'm curious to see. I don't think the low pass is going to be useful, but the lag might be. So now my wardrobe change indicates that we're almost caught up to the future. That's right, the end is in sight. The end of this one anyway. We're going to build on this in subsequent videos, make it better and better, weirder and weirder. There's one last thing I want to do before we call this a day. I've got a note transposer in here, bringing my sequence up an octave. I want to make that jump around a little bit. Drop into steps. Let's make it bipolar. Jump up and down. 16th notes. Make it short, like 7. I'll map the sequence to the octave. Looks like there's a range of 6, presumably for 6 octaves, so let me just start with 2. Interesting. Seems to be inverted. And the very last thing I want to do, just for fun, is to run this out to an analog distortion. It can be amazing even with a fully digital synth, digital oscillators, digital filter, totally built in the computer. A little bit of analog can really warm it up. In our next video, we're going to build a sequencer for this instrument. We're going to build it in the grid. It's going to be fun, it's going to be fast, intuitive, and I don't know too much more about it than that, so tune in next time. Look forward to seeing you there.